So in the last video, I talked about how you can learn the grid because people sometimes don't understand how you get to a certain place in the grid, how you come up with some ideas to do something. And I want to show you basically a journey that took place in my life because at some point I used FM8 for bass lines, for dubstep bass lines or drum bass lines. And what I did back then was to use just one operator or one oscillator here. This is one sine oscillator. Just a pure bass sound, pure sine bass, pretty pure. And what I used to do was to use a second oscillator or second operator here. And I switched this to a different wave shape. I switched it to, we have a lot of wave shapes here in FM8. Switch this maybe to a second or third format here, and it looks like this, right? It's like a sine with multiple zero crossings here, but slowly fading out within one cycle of the waveform. And this sounds like this. So it's not really a sine signal, just 3 octaves higher, 4 octaves higher. It just sounds like a formant or like a vocal sound even though it's just a sine kind of, but you know, 10 times higher in frequency and then slowly fading out. And this is kind of interesting because I used to mix this into the sine as a phase frequency modulation source here into the sine. Then you get this nice pure fundamental for the bass, and then the overtones are basically created with this second operator here. And then you can use here the multi-stage envelope generators to bring this in over time. Oh. And then operator D, frequency modulate E. Maybe a little bit of the tuning here. Maybe use here also format. Let's go back to 1. So you can create dubstep kind of bass sounds with this easily just by using the format here. And I kind of like this sound. So you can already imagine that you can just copy this waveform into the scroll oscillator and have kind of the same effect. So I remember this, that I used to do this in FM8. So I tried to use this with a scroll in the grid. Well, let's go for poly grid. There it is. So in here, also, it's also monophonic, by the way. Using an ADSR, that's what we need. Output here. And let's go for scroll. So it sounds like this. Maybe disable this. So also just a pure bass. Do I have a sine here? Yeah. So I created here some waveforms called formants. As you can see here, the inspiration was literally FM8. So you get this nice formant vocally sound, and we can now use here a sine, as I used the first operator back then, and then I frequency modulate here the sine with this form and scroll. Then go back out here. So you can kind of do the same. Let's use a different one here. You can even duplicate this and say I have here maybe 10. Here I have, what's that? Third. Yeah, it's also cool. Maybe use here fourth. And then bring this together with a merge. With 3 inputs. Nice. Use a value so you can morph between all these 3 options here. So you have already 2 values you can modulate over time with segments, for instance, right? And have some fun with this. So let's use the segments here. Put this in the one-shot mode, maybe a half note, gets re-triggered. So let's bring this in. And then another one, and put this in loop mode, quarter note, bring this down. And here we modulate basically the value of this. Right, so you can play around with these kind of ideas. You have 2 values you can use to modify the sound in a certain direction. Maybe that's too fast here. Let's go here to and then on top of that you can also use a filter, of course, cell and key filter. Or even a notch. Is there a notch in here? No, you need to use the XP notch. Okay, so that's just basically the idea. You get the formant oscillator shapes in here into the scroll from the FM8, and then you do basically the same what I did in FM8. Modulate the sine oscillator with that, or frequency modulate the sine oscillator with that, and then you get a lot of different overtones that are pretty dubsteppy or drum bass techy. Another idea I had with this knowledge was, instead of using scroll, I just use the sine by itself and modify the phase signal of this. And for that, to give you the idea how this works, I use your oscilloscope. And maybe put this into the pitch mode here. Do this a bit, extend this a bit here. So we have a sine here. And now we try to modify basically the phase. Instead of using the internal phaser of the sine oscillator, we switch this off. You can also here remove this for now. And use now as an input a phaser. So switching here the internal phaser off, we can now use the external phaser. We have to use here 100%. We have the same outcome as before. The only difference now is that we can influence the phase signal. Still just a pure sine. So what we do now here is we use the mirror of the phase or phase category here on top. We have a lot of modules we can choose from. And the mirror kind of doubles the zero crossings when I here at 0, nothing happens. Yeah, that's better. So it looks like there's a mirror here, right? And then we mirror basically the wave shape multiple times. And when we use here the right number, and 12 is just doubled 0, then we can go to 24, which is also doubled. So it looks like now we are just 4 octaves higher, and so it's basically just a pitch increase, right? So what we can do now is we can do the same trick as before. We slowly fade out the waveform over time in one cycle. And we do this by using a multiply and basically volume modulate here the sine output. And the phasor output here is basically just a ramp signal for the cycle, for one cycle. So one ramp here is one cycle. So we can use this to drive here the multiply input, because 1 is volume. Maybe I use your constant to show you this. If I use 1, we have the same output as before. And then we can use this here as a volume slider, more or less. And 0 is, 0 volume. So we need a signal between 0 and 1. And the output of the phasor is exactly that. It's a ramp signal from 0 to 1. So we can use this as an input for the multiplier pretty easily. And it gives us basically a ramp for the cycle. So this is one cycle of the pitch we are pressing on the keyboard. So it's like before in the phase 4 with the formant wave shape, where we slowly, here we're fading in, but in the FM8 we're fading out. So we have to reverse this, and we can reverse this pretty easily here because there is a reverse. There's a reverse, here it is, yeah. Put this in here. So now we are slowly fading out here with the volume within the cycle. So what this does is basically it kind of simulates the cycle for the ear. Basically this is just here the pitch, but within the pitch we have multiple different other pitches, kind of. So because we are slowly fading out here over time, we simulate kind of this fundamental pitch, and we can amplify that we are on a different fundamental pitch by using a different or another sine here and mix this in, right? So this is basically our cycle here, from here to here. That's the fundamental. So we either use a mixer here and mix the fundamental and this kind of fake overtone together. Maybe bring this down here a bit. Or even better, instead of a mixer, we just say, this is here, maybe some kind of experiment. Maybe put this here, put this over here. Instead, we use the output of that. We use just the sine as an output. And then we use this as a phase modulation input here. So on top of that, which in my opinion sounds already nice and gives you a lot of options to create sounds, we can put this even, or we can do even more by using the phase category and maybe try to use a formant instead here after the mirror. Maybe use a shift. shift is not that cool. Let's try a skew. Or maybe use the skew in front of the mirror. So you have this value and this value you can modulate over time to create, yeah, interesting bass sounds. So let's use here this format for that. And this one maybe for the skew. There's not even distortion on there yet, it's just pure synthesized. So distortion could be interesting too, but maybe it's too much because you already have so many overtones. Distortion only introduces more overtones and makes it more dense, but maybe that's exactly what you want. Maybe a peak. Or a notch. Maybe after the distortion. Or you can even use the phaser. Phaser here as a filter. And we put this into, oh yeah, you have to use here the value input. And usually it has some internal LFO to change here some parameters. So you can disable this by using the input here. You can see the speed knob now is disabled, and now you can use the value to, yeah, kind of move through the filter. Maybe it's too much modulated here. So a lot of options and values you can modulate over time to make the sound really stand out over time. And usually when you use soft synthesizers, you don't have that many options, right? You can maybe, you know, change some effects here and there. But here it's basically just changing the oscillator itself in so many directions that it's actually just using a wavetable or wavetable oscillator in itself becomes quite boring, because you just, you know, drive through the wavetable from here to here and that's it. And then you have maybe some values you can change afterwards in the effects, right? With the EQs or maybe filters or distortion settings and so on. But here you can really influence the wave shape before you even get into the FX part of your synthesizer, which is kind of interesting in my opinion. And yeah, and this is kind of a journey I had, or this is kind of an experience journey over time, where I started back in the early 2000s with the FM8, right? Made a lot of bass sounds with that. Then I got at some point a grid, and I tried out some different techniques here, and then I got the scroll, and then I, you know, remembered how I did bass sounds back with FM8, and tried some experiments here on the grid with the scroll, and then here with the phase signal and so on. So kind of remember certain things you did in the past and it sounded great, and then you try and clone it to your current setup, and then you come up with these kind of bass patches. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you like the video. Hit me up with the comments if you have some questions, and if you have maybe some additional ideas what you can do to create these kind of nice sounds or bass sounds. And yeah, let me know. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.